Alright, so in today's episode, we're going to talk about sleep and caffeine. I'll see you inside. So, as the majority of people know, caffeine has a deleterious effect on your sleep. Simply put, when we're trying to go to sleep, we want as much tiredness and drowsiness signaling in our brain as possible, and as little alertness signaling as we can. And as we've discussed in the previous episodes, caffeine will decrease that signal of tiredness and increase our alertness. So if there's caffeine in our system before we go to bed, it's going to have a deleterious effect on our sleep. And now, caffeine has what's referred to as a half-life. And there are tons and tons of genetic variants that actually affect what the half-life of caffeine in your body is. So referring to the half-life, this is simply the amount of time that it takes for half of the caffeine to leave your body. This is kind of just one signal of how long it will take for all of the caffeine to leave your body. And now some people are referred to as fast metabolizers, meaning that maybe after they've had 200 milligrams of coffee, that sticks around in their system for about 4 to 6 hours. And now other people are considered slow metabolizers, where that same 200 milligram dose may actually stick around for upwards of 24 hours. And now these are the two extremes, and most people fall right around in the middle. With that being said, these two people would have drastically different protocols for drinking caffeine, and the second person may not even be able to have caffeine without it affecting their sleep at all. And the first person can drink caffeine later in the day and not see any deleterious effects to their sleep. And now you would likely know if you are at one of these two extremes, but experimentation can show you if you're in the middle and how close to the median you are. So typically, caffeine will be fully metabolized between 8 and 12 hours, depending on the dose. The higher the dose, the longer it will be in your body. It also seems like humans are better at metabolizing caffeine earlier in the morning, but that's still yet to be determined. And there's also a lot of food factors and other things that could impact how you metabolize caffeine, but we're not going to talk about those for the sake of today's discussion. So, how do we know what kind of metabolizer of caffeine we are? One easy way would kind of just be to look at your day and understand if you get tired in the mid-afternoon after a large cup of coffee in the morning. If so, that's probably a pretty good sign that the caffeine is beginning to wear off and you've metabolized it at a pretty decent rate before you've gone to bed. So that dose might be great for sleep, but it may not be good for having energy throughout the entire day. But we wouldn't really want to take another dose of caffeine that late in the afternoon because by the time we're trying to go to sleep, it may not actually be metabolized. So instead, we may want to split up our dose of caffeine or try and have some caffeine in the morning and maybe some caffeine around 10 or 12, given that our bedtime might be around 10 o'clock. I think if it doesn't impair your wakefulness in the afternoon, as early as you can stop drinking caffeine, the better. And like with all stimulants, the less you can use, the better. Now, there is a kind of nerdy side to this. As wearable technology is improving and becoming more accessible, we can use this to see how caffeine is affecting our sleep and our performance. So sleep is likely the most prevalent biomarker measured by wearable technology, and it provides a lot of insight into what our nervous system is doing and how it's responding to caffeine. So a lot of times people tell me that they can drink caffeine right before bed and still go to sleep. And these people are absolutely correct. However, the quality of that sleep absolutely will not be as good as if they did not have the stimulant in their system. And you can simply assess quality of sleep by not just looking at the time spent in bed, but actually looking at time spent in different sleep stages. Indicators that your sleep quality is increasing is an increasing amount of deep sleep and REM sleep given the same time in bed. And indicators that the quality is decreasing is if those numbers begin to decrease and your light sleep begins to increase. So let's say you have caffeine in the late afternoon and you still get 8 hours of sleep, but for some reason you wake up in the morning and you just don't feel as energetic. You may want to look to see if your deep and REM sleep are decreasing, and if so, it's probably likely that the caffeine is affecting the quality of your sleep. Another thing you can look at is what's referred to as sleep latency, which is simply just when you go into your bedroom, how long does it actually take you to fall asleep? If you've changed your caffeine dose in any way, and when it comes time to sleep, for some reason you're having a more difficult time getting to sleep, it could potentially be the caffeine. So, once we look at all this data, we can kind of figure out how fast or how slowly we metabolize caffeine and adjust from there. If we know it takes a long time for us to metabolize caffeine, then maybe we can just have one dose in the morning and that will keep us through for the entire day. And if we metabolize caffeine more quickly, then we can simply just spread out our doses and try and have another dose in the later morning, but not too late. Let's say we can guesstimate that we metabolize caffeine in 12 hours, then that's how long before bed we would want to have caffeine. Now, that being said, sometimes it's hard to actually know just off of qualitative assessments. This is where we can come back to these heart rate watches and things like that and look at our heart rate variability if it's a metric that it measures. So heart rate variability is actually a measure of how adaptable your heart is. So heart rate variability is going to look at the variability between your heartbeats at different periods of the day to see how rigid or flexible your heart is being. And this is a reflection of the readiness of your nervous system. If you're in a state of very high stress, the heart will be more rigid and less adaptable, so your heart rate variability will decrease. And if you're having too much caffeine and not enough sleep, this is the state that your heart will be in. So if we look at our heart rate variability and it begins to decline, it could be because caffeine is pulling us too much to the side of aroused and alert, and we are spending less time in the recovery phase, which will allow our heart rate variability to be greater. And in the long run, this can definitely inhibit our mental and physical performance. Now, one thing I want to mention is what I call the caffeine sandwich. This is the trouble that a lot of people get in when caffeine is affecting their sleep, so they need more caffeine. So let's say you're taking caffeine in the late afternoon and you can't get to sleep, so your sleep quality and quantity is reduced. You'll then wake up in the morning and still feel groggy and think, oh, I just need more coffee. So the next day you have even more coffee, and you have an even harder time getting to sleep at night because you have so much stimulant still left in your system. And unknowingly, you wake up the next day groggy and increase your caffeine intake again. This is the thing that all of this information is trying to avoid. With that being said, that is all I have written down in my notes for this podcast. I hope this provided you with some valuable information as to how you can figure out your caffeine sensitivity and rate of metabolization, and how you can use caffeine to get the utmost benefit and make sure it's a tool and not a crutch. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.